Introducing NASM One, NASM's ultimate membership program. Unlock access to everything your fitness career needs to succeed. Unlimited CEUs, free courses, access to our premium app, and exclusive discounts, all for $35 a month. NASM One is best-in-class tools, cutting-edge certifications, confidence in your craft, and everything you do as a personal trainer made easy, so we can achieve our greatest goals together as one.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's show where we are going to talk about optimizing brain health and cognition after 50. I really feel like it is everywhere. How to keep our brain healthy because of the rise in dementia-related diseases. I think that all of us after a certain age think, is it about living long or is it about living well? And for me, it's about living well. And so much of that means keeping my brain healthy as well as my body. So I'm Angie Miller. I'm your host, and this is Strong Mind, Strong Body. Today, my guest to deep dive into this topic is Cody Sipe. He is the co-founder of the Functional Aging Institute. He's going to help us deep dive into brain health and cognition. We're going to talk about the physiology of neuroplasticity and some of the research on brain games and how lifestyle factors can influence our risk of cognitive decline and dementia-related diseases. So I know that you're going to get so much out of Cody. I just saw him. We were at Asia Fitness Conference together in Bangkok, and I know he was presenting some amazing information. So it is my honor to have him on the show. So Cody, come on in and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Angie. Really appreciate being here. So I've been working with older adults for really the past 30 years now. I currently serve as a full professor in the doctoral physical therapy program. I've been here for 12 years. My background was in clinical exercise physiology. And really recently, this area of brain health and cognitive fitness has become really important to me because I see how many people are concerned about it. And then also, I'm over 50 myself, so I am personally concerned about it as well, just as you expressed.
Yeah, well, you know what's funny is that I too have been teaching and working with older adults for decades. And all of a sudden you get to that point in your life where you're like, well, I'm kind of getting into the landmark of being an older adult. Depends on how you describe older adults, right? So I laugh because I'm
It's
like,
older
you're
than
right.
me, whatever that is.
Yes, exactly. That's how I've learned to define older adults as anybody who's older than me. Thank you very much. So that's my loose parameter. But the thing is to your point is the older I get, the more I am interested and invested in keeping my brain healthy, not just my body healthy. And there's such a rise in the talk about this. And I think it's because dementia related diseases are more pronounced. And I think from what I understand, it's because we are living longer. So we're seeing this. Is that accurate?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there's just more older adults, period. And that's the number of older adults in the country and around the world is going to continue to climb steadily. I mean, if you look at projections out to the year 2100 in the US, we're just then starting to see a leveling off of the older adult population. So it's really the numbers that are driving the increased number of cases. The prevalence, actually, the percentage of older adults with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias has actually gone down a little bit, but the numbers keep climbing because there's so many more older adults, and it's a big concern. You know, people, as you said, they're not as concerned with living to 120. They want to live as long as possible, but as well as possible. You know, that quality of life component is there, and probably more than any of the other kind of age-related conditions, dementia scares people. I mean, it really scares people. And they see what happens to people they know, their loved ones who develop dementia, and how stressful that is and how much of a burden that is. And they don't want that on anyone. So I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such an uptick in this focus on brain health and cognitive fitness. And I think this is really good timing for this particular episode, because I think cognitive fitness is really the next big thing in the fitness industry.
Yeah, I absolutely do too. And I think to your point, when you see it up close and personal, and many of us have, and more of us will, just because of the percentage of older adults, it is something that you go, yeah, I want to do anything in my power to prevent that. Without fear being the driver, but with information being the driver. Because I always find that there's that fine line of, okay, Angie, don't let fear get in the way. Just let information be your guiding source. So before we go any further, Cody, though, I do have to ask you because you differentiate between brain health and cognitive fitness. I'm not sure a lot of people do that. So let's give me a lay of the land. What's brain health versus cognitive fitness or
Yeah, really good
cognition?
point. And it's a good distinction to make. We can think about it kind of in a computer software analogy, right? So we have the hardware of a computer and we have the software of a computer. So the hardware, it's all the physical components. And the software then obviously is the programming that's laid on top of those physical components. Well, the bigger that the software gets and the more complicated it gets, well, the better the hardware you have to have. So the hardware is really kind of the starting point for layering on the software. So when we think about our brain is an organ. We don't want our brain to be a healthy organ, just like we want our heart to be healthy. And so kind of the brain health part is like keeping the hardware kind of up to date so that it's working well. And then the cognitive fitness then is the software that we lay on top of it, being able to use that healthy brain to think really, really well. Now, those two things obviously go together, just like in a computer, those two things go together. But there are kind of some separate aspects that we can approach more from a brain health perspective versus a cognitive fitness perspective. So if we think about Alzheimer's or other related dementias, some people are concerned with, I don't want to get that negative thing, right? I want that negative thing happening to me. But others think of it from more of an optimization standpoint, right? They don't see themselves really as being a candidate as far as a risk for Alzheimer's disease goes, but they want to remain as mentally sharp as possible for as long as possible. So those two things, brain health and cognitive fitness, really go together.
Yeah, I like that analogy of, hardware and software, and I like the fact that they are kind of are layered and they both promote one another and support one another.
Mhm.
So I think that's very good. And to your point, some people maybe they don't feel like that runs in their family, so they don't think that they have a familial risk, but they still want to stay as cognitively sound throughout their lifespan as possible, and that makes sense to me. Lifestyle factors related to decreasing our risk of cognitive decline and dementia. We know it's exercise. We know it's sleep. We know it's nutrition. Is there anything that you want to add to that, or even that you want to hone in on those components? Because we all go, yeah, 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 sleep and nutrition and fitness. Okay, but it isn't
Well,
that simple.
yeah, I mean, it really is. Those are the big things. If you kind of think about you want to get the big rocks in first, right? You want to make sure that you are addressing those major factors, and you want to do it holistically. So when we think about brain health is actually really closely linked to cardiovascular health. So all those risk factors that we see for cardiovascular disease, such as what you just said, don't smoke, you have to eat a heart healthy diet, you want to be active, you want to sleep, you want to keep your stress levels low, you want to look out for blood pressure, cholesterol, those sorts of factors. Those all apply to brain health as well. So doing the things that are going to keep our heart healthy are going to go a long way towards keeping our brain healthy as well. And exercise, just as one factor, can reduce dementia risk by 30% or more. Some studies showing an 80% reduced risk of dementia. And again, that depends on the individual. So we definitely want those big rocks in. But what we also see kind of from a brain health perspective is that there are some kind of nuances that do come into play when it comes to brain health, such as in the nutritional side of things. There's kind of heart health in one category, brain health overlaps that, but then there are some factors that are coming out as being potentially more important for brain health than they might be for cardiovascular health. So the research continues to develop and emerge in this area. We certainly don't have a lot of answers that are really firm, although you do see a lot of people who are promoting very specific types of either nutrition factors or programs or supplements. And supplements is an area that, again, we're not sure how well some of these supplements may work yet or not.
I'm glad you said that because there is a lot of information out there. There's a lot of supplements, and it kind of it makes me go, if it were that simple, right? If it were that
Right.
simple, would it really
Yeah.
be cost me $5 in a bottle? I don't know. I know that one of the things that you talked about was the link between brain health and heart health, but you also said there's extra stuff that can enhance your brain. And I think about things like I just started taking piano lessons. We have this beautiful baby grand that my daughters used to play. And I thought, now, why is that still sitting there? I used to play flute when I was growing up. So I decided I
Mhm.
like things that challenge me and make me uncomfortable. And frankly, things that I'm usually kind of terrible at. And piano, so far, not so great. But I feel like those kind of things like musicality, is that true? Like learning new skills, taking in new information, having to reprocess. Am I on the right path on that?
Yeah, right, exactly. Now you're getting kind of deeper into the layer of some, I'm gonna say, fitness or movement kinds of things that are more specific to the brain than they are for the heart. So let's take cardiovascular exercise as an example. The recommendations for cardio exercise for the heart are really the same as for the brain, which is really the same as we see everywhere else. Or 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise every day of the week, or most days if possible. And but with the brain is different, right? It is that thinking organ that we have. And so layering on some aspects that are going to challenge the brain, they might not necessarily challenge the heart as much. They might not be as heart healthy, so to speak, but they're going to be more stimulating to the brain. So you mentioned playing a piano, right? Well, that is a physical movement. It's not difficult from a cardiovascular standpoint, but it is beneficial for the brain. And what we see is, and the research is, if you do cardiovascular exercise, that helps to really promote a very critical neurotrophic factor called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. That's probably the one that everybody's heard about. But what's also interesting is that strength training is also very beneficial to the brain, and it follows a separate pathway for improvement. So actually, cardiovascular exercise and strength training from a brain health perspective are additive. But then to go beyond that, you need to then stimulate kind of the neural networks. You need to stimulate the thinking parts of the brain. So there are three primary processes that are really important for brain growth and cognitive fitness. You have angiogenesis, which is a stimulation of new blood vessels; neurogenesis, the stimulation of new nerve cells, and probably one of the kind of biggest breakthroughs in kind of the area of brain health and fitness in the past 20 years has been this idea of neuroplasticity, that yes, you can actually grow new brain cells. And then you need to connect those brain cells into an existing network. In other words, you got to use them, and that's synaptogenesis. So for, again, general health benefits, if you're doing cardiovascular exercise, yep, that helps to stimulate angiogenesis, just like it stimulates good heart health. But you really want to then grow those new brain cells and then connect them into existing networks. And the only way to do that is to do things that require the brain to think. So playing piano is a good example of that, right? Especially if it's new, if you're just learning, right? Your brain is trying to figure that out. And because it's a physical movement and not just a brain game, that promotes even more benefits for your brain.
I'm glad you brought that part up because I think that's again what the research is pointing is it's the physical movement mixed with the cognition required to accurately engage in that physical movement, if you will. To me, another similar one is, I just started taking golf lessons too. That same thing where it's a physical movement, but my brain has to make sense of that skill or the skill required to execute the movement, if that makes sense. So that's really good information. I'm glad you brought that up because that also brings me then to you kind of made the analogy of it's even better than brain games because you're learning that new information. Because what is the deal with brain games? I mean, Is me getting up and doing Wordle every day going to buy me a hall pass to keep my brain healthy?
Well, unfortunately not. It's doing those brain games are beneficial, right? It's not that they're not helpful, don't do them. But what we see is if you look at all the different processes that the brain is involved in, kind of the brain tasks, and there's a kind of a very large area of tasks that we call executive function. And a lot of tasks are under here. Some of the memory skills, inhibition skills, planning, processing, these kind of all fall under this area of executive functioning. And research has kind of identified as those are the critical elements that then translate into better functioning in your daily life. And so brain games, you will get better on whatever specific tasks that brain game is requiring of you. So if you're doing something that's very kind of visual, that will improve, but that doesn't really then bleed over into the other aspects of brain functioning that you really want. So there's no transfer effect is how they refer to it. It kind of doesn't bleed over into anything else. So you get better at that one particular thing. So if you do crossword puzzles, you get better at doing crossword puzzles, or that type of thinking skill. But with exercise or movement that requires your brain to work in coordination with your movement, then there's a much broader effect on brain cognition and on brain fitness overall. And that tends to translate better into real life. So there's actually a number of kind of movement strategies that we know work really well for improving brain health. So things like Tai Chi. Tai Chi works. It's kind of similar to what you're talking about with golf. Like Tai Chi is very skillful. It's not intense, but it's very skillful. And then when you add kind of the layering of kind of breath focus on top of your Tai Chi movements and memorizing the sequence of the movements, very stimulating to the brain. Dance is very good for the brain. And I always like to ask my participants in workshops and stuff like, what is the best dance to really stimulate the brain? And of course, you get all kinds of things thrown out. It's ballroom, it's, jazz, it's whatever kind of dance, is out there. But really the best one is the one you don't know, the one in which you have to learn how to do. Again, kind of going back to golf and piano, right? You see those correlations. Sports is a great way to improve cognitive fitness because not only are you being physical, you're always responding to what's going on in your environment, right? You're trying to think 2 plays ahead and you're processing that. You're seeing where the ball is. Like if you think about soccer, the ball's over there, but that means I need to reposition myself and get ready, for a certain sequence of events. And then it doesn't happen. I've got to respond appropriately. Your brain is thinking really, really heavily while you're moving. So all those really work well, but then we can also kind of simulate those types of physical cognitive behaviors, even in the gym as well.
Yeah. So, Cody, you've given me so much. I got to pick up on a few things here. But first, I want to reintroduce you in the show. So, my name is Angie Miller. This is Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm talking to Cody Sipe. He's the co founder of the Functional Aging Institute. And we're talking about optimizing brain health and cognition after 50. And I already feel smarter. And the reason why is because I just started taking piano and golf. So, yay, me. I am doing things that integrate my body and my brain. And so, Cody, what you're saying is things like golf, Tai Chi, piano, dance, things where you're moving, but your brain has to process the movements. I'm also thinking about things like if I'm on a treadmill, I'm going into overdrive. I'm not having to think, but if I go on a trail and I go hiking, now I have to think about where I'm stepping. I have to pay attention to what I'm paying attention to. So if I hear you right, not to simplify it, but it is not going through the motions when you're doing movement, but doing movement that requires that you are 100% thinking about the movement and having to reprocess patterns and so forth. Is that right?
Yeah, you're really nailing it because that is true. And I like the example because I use that example too, just walking on a treadmill versus walking on a trail. And being outside of nature actually has its own separate effect on brain health as well, probably through stress hormones. But there's a kind of a basic idea. There's 2 basic types of movement, especially from an exercise perspective. There's closed skill and open skill. Closed skill are those highly repeatable tasks that you don't have to think about, and all the variability is kind of removed. So if you're doing a seated machine chest press, right, there's no variability to that, right? You can't even mess it up, and you don't even have to think about it other than giving effort. But if you're doing something that requires more variability, and you're having to think through it, you're having to respond to these kind of variables that are coming up, that's going to be more of an open skill exercise. And so anything that is open skill is going to require more what we call cognitive load, a little bit more thinking, but it's also going to require a lot of physical load as well. So we're trying to put those two things together. There are also two kind of ways to do this. It's typically referred to as dual tasking, right? So multitasking is when you're trying to do two separate cognitive tasks at the same time. I'm trying to read a book, but I'm also trying to listen to my wife tell a story. And I'm not real. What I'm doing is I'm actually trying to switch back and forth really fast between those two things. And then you go through 3 paragraphs and realize you didn't read anything. And then you're having to ask your wife, well, what did you say? Repeat that. Multitasking, there's a lot of interference. Dual tasking is where we're going to take a physical task and layer it with a cognitive task. So a very classic test for older adults would be a timed up and go, where we see how long it takes you to get up out of a chair, walk to a line 3 meters away, turn around and walk back. And you do that at your normal pace. See how long it takes you. Then you do the dual task timed up and go. You count backwards by 3s, starting at 100 while you walk. So now you're doing a cognitive task while you're doing a physical task. And what do you think happens to their scores when they add that cognitive task?
Listen, I can't even think right now because I'm trying to count backwards by 3, and I'm like, okay, this is disturbing. I
You're
work at an
distracting
older
yourself.
right. I work at an
Yeah.
older adult community, and they're always telling me that one of the tests someday will be that I have to count backwards by 7. And I'm like, I already fail. Can I just say that
Yeah.
now, even at a young age? I'm like, oh, what if I'm just not good at math? Can you have me do letters or words? No.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So what happens is in kind of that dual task scenario is people slow down, right? Their physical task slows down because they're thinking. Well, we don't want to have to we shouldn't have our physical performance interfered with by a cognitive task, right? The goal is to be able to do both of those simultaneously. So if we do a math skill, like what you were saying, that's one option. And some people really freak out about that. Like as soon as you introduce counting, they're like, oh, no, I can't. I'm terrible at math. But that's just one option. You can do all sorts of things. So you can do something related to spelling, such as spelling your name backwards. It can be recalling something from yesterday. I want you to tell me what you ate yesterday, starting in the morning while you're doing some sort of physical task. It could be a memorization of a sequence, right? That's what you do in dance, right? You have to memorize a certain sequence of movements and kind of patterns. So teaching them a new pattern. All that is very cognitively stimulating. And those are just a few of the types of cognitive tasks that you can add to almost any type of physical exercise, right? It can be walking, it can be lunging, it can be squatting, it can be pressing, it can be rowing. It can be any of those things, or it could be even a combination of those movements that you're having them to perform. But
And that's
even
dual task.
within that, there are also kind of 2 different ways to do it. So if I'm having you count backwards while you're doing a task, those are 2 very unrelated tasks, right? They're 2 separate things you're trying to do. But in a sport, as an example, your cognitive task is related to your physical task, right? How you're thinking determines how you move. And so another way is to have people actually respond to either visual or auditory cues or responding to their environment. And that then determines what they do, what their next movement is. Now that's getting more related to like a sports activity. And so it seems, again, the research is still kind of developing in this area. It seems that the more closely you can link the cognitive task to the physical task, the better.
Okay. I like that because sometimes even when I'm teaching older adults, I'll have them do like multiplication tables. And I
Mhm.
like when there's a higher correlation between the task and the physical task and the mental task. I just think that that resonates more with people because you're right. Sometimes people just freak out if you start giving them math problems. So I like where it's going with that. Cody, I have a question for you about the physiology of neuroplasticity. And I know this is a big
Mhm.
question, but I said it in the description, so we kind of have to touch on it. But the physiology of neuroplasticity is a foundation for understanding how exercise improves cognition. Maybe just give us a sound bite of like neuroplasticity.
Well, those three processes of angiogenesis, neurogenesis, and synaptogenesis really capture most of that basic physiology of what's happening. Now, you layer on that is what's stimulating those processes. Well, some of those neurotrophic factors, such as BDNF, as an example, being one of the primary ones that we focus on, is kind of that fertilizer. People call BDNF miracle grow for the brain, right? It's kind of like fertilizer. It's helping kind of for all these events to occur. So the physical movement, especially things that are cardiovascular in nature or strength training in nature, are going to really start that process, right? We need good blood flow. And then tapping into starting to stimulate neurogenesis. But in order to really then use those nerves, because it's not enough to grow them, we want to use them and keep them. And then that's where the cognitive load comes into play. One of the researchers said that kind of physical exercise kind of primes the brain to actually grow, but then is the cognitive performance or the cognitive tasks that really kind of lock it in long term. And they use those neurons. Those nerves get connected into larger neural networks or thinking networks. And the only way to really drive that is by doing things, kind of as you refer to, that are a little more uncomfortable, that you're not used to doing, that are new. And so it could be kind of these dual task activities. It could be engaging in a new sport or a skill like golf or learning a new musical instrument, or it could even be doing things that are just novel in your everyday life. So you hear a lot of kind of brain experts saying, look, why don't you try to brush your teeth in the morning with your other hand? Right. Well, that's actually one way to try to lock in kind of that neural development, because now your brain, who controls all of your movement, is trying to figure out how do I get my left hand to respond appropriately and be controlled appropriately to brush my teeth well. Now you get to try, of course, the first time you brush your whole face, or it's terrible, but it gets better over time if you continue to do it.
Okay. You've given a lot of interesting information. I've had people talk about brain health before, but some of the stuff that you've mentioned really either hones in on it or kind of shed some new light. And I also like what you said because I always think about like exercises. I'm watering my plants,
Mhm.
so to speak. I'm watering them, but I also have to do things that seal the deal, if you will. I've opened up all this opportunity for new growth, but what am I going to do with it? Am I just going to go lie down now, or am I going to maybe go do something like read a book or learn some new information where I get to seal the deal on there being optimal opportunities to create uh, new brain synapses or put information together, if you will, if I'm saying that the right way. Am I on the right path with that based on what
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
said?
you are. Yeah, absolutely. And so we see with older adults as an example, those that haven't worked out, let's say they've been sedentary, they haven't lived a really healthy life. Well, if they just start to move, the more they move, the better. And we've actually seen that people that they might exercise, but then they sit around for the rest of the day, a lot of those benefits of exercise are negated by all that sedentariness later. And so we do want people to move and be active. But then beyond that, once you kind of reach those milestones, then you want to start to layer on some of these more challenging cognitive tasks in your life. And you can do that in that exercise environment, or you could do it through sport, dance, Tai Chi, as we talked about, or physical things such as learning a new musical instrument, playing golf, like things that you're talking about as well. That's really what's going to kind of lock in the benefit for our cognitive performance as we get older.
Okay. So, Cody, I have one more question for you. As if we're talking to trainers, or even if we're just talking to everyday population who wants to just be more fit and keep their brain healthy, and they tuned into this because they were like, "Hey, I'm over 50. I want to optimize my brain health." What would be some key takeaways that you would say to a trainer or to a person? I know it's basically what you said was, try new things, get uncomfortable, learn new skills. Is there anything else you would throw out there? Any takeaways that you would add in addition to all of this?
Yeah, certainly anything is better than nothing, but you need to kind of think about it from the brain health perspective first before you think about from a cognitive fitness perspective. And this is my opinion, but you see people that they are interested in improving their brain, and they go to things like brain games, right? They're thinking and they're doing sedentary things that are thinking, and that's not the way to improve your brain health. And a lot of these cognitive fitness programs have really marketed themselves as, being able to reduce your risk of dementia and that sort of thing. We haven't seen really any evidence of that. And so focus on your brain health first, which means your cardiovascular health. Get those things done, and then layer on some of these more cognitive fitness aspects. And you can find things that are enjoyable for you to do. You don't have to, be in a formal program necessarily. Options for you to get out and do things that you enjoy that are then going to stimulate not only your brain health, but your cognitive fitness as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really good. I'm glad that you touched on that because I do think that you're right. There's a lot of, doing puzzles and so forth, but it's doing it from a seated position. And yes, you're thinking, but I like the idea and I like the way that you've honed in on the research supporting that movement and cognition go together. Move your body, but think about the movement. Do complex patterns or things that make you think while you're moving. So I thought this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Cody, for coming on and talking about cognition after 50 and brain health. And if people want to reach you, do you have a site or an email where they might be able to reach you?
Yeah, you can certainly reach out to our organization, functionalaginginstitute.com, and email us at contact@functionalaginginstitute.com. And that message can go straight to me if you earmark it for me.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of our Strong Mind, Strong Body listeners. I appreciate you so much. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and I hope you have a great week.